This video is sponsored by Jasmine Water. This special review is a little something extra. A gift. What's the word?
Bonus!
Anyway, Flight of the Navigator was released in 1986, a good year, and is known as a cult favourite. You know, for a beloved cult film of the 1980s, it's not easy to find. I searched on several digital platforms and all I could find was a documentary called Life After the Navigator. More on that later. So I had to buy the DVD for this one, but this isn't the first or last time that'll happen. Anything for the review. So let's go back to a decade of electronic music, tacky special effects and robots. Here's my review of Flight of the Navigator. David Freeman is a 12-year-old boy with a mum, dad and 7-year-old brother named Jeff. When sent to retrieve Jeff from playing in the woods, David falls in a ravine and gets knocked out. Hours later he wakes up and heads home, only to find the house looking very different, and more importantly, his family are not there. The elderly couple who live there don't know who he is. The police are called and they discover that David has been missing for 8 years and declared dead. David is reunited with his family in Fort Lauderdale, but they are 8 years older, leaving everyone questioning where David has been and why he hasn't aged. David is subjected to tests in hospital, but between a voice calling out to him in the night and alpha brainwaves being emitted by his brain, the hospital cannot tell what happened. Meanwhile, NASA are investigating a UFO crash and are informed of the odd results from the hospital. They ask for David to come to the NASA base for more intensive tests as their equipment is more sophisticated and some of the results from the hospital match up to data they got from the ship. David and his family agree to him staying for 48 hours for testing, but after scanning David's brain, they manage to get information about star charts and planets they've never heard of. David freaks out and runs back to his room. Here he loses his temper to his new friend Carolyn and her mail delivering robot Ralph. Carolyn agrees to contact David's parents after she discovers that the 48 hours NASA promised is now going to be over a week. David manages to smuggle himself out in Ralph to the hangar where the ship is, and for some reason the ship responds to him, opening up and even communicating via the ship's artificial intelligence, who keeps referring to David as the Navigator. NASA have realised that David has escaped and is in the ship. They try and fail to get David to leave the ship as David and the AI, who he now calls Max, fly away. Max took David along with other species from other planets to his home planet of Phelan for analysis. The time it took to travel to the planet was 4.4 hours, but as they were travelling faster than light, 8 years passed on Earth. Normally, Max would take the species back in time to where they were taken from, but it's too dangerous for humans as they may be vaporized. The crash has had Max lose his way home and he needs to scan David's brain for the star charts to return to Phelan. David agrees as long as he's taken back home to his family. After the scan, Max starts to develop an attitude and the two fly around the world trying to get home. Meanwhile, Carolyn has told David's family everything. David manages to call home to explain that he's on his way, and NASA, having discovered how he escaped, head to David's home awaiting his arrival. David arrives but then makes the decision to risk being vaporized in order to go back in time. In his mind, his family aren't the family he knows anymore, and NASA will test him for the rest of his life. Max warns that the risk is high, but David insists on trying. After a very flashy sequence, David wakes up in the ravine and heads back to his home where his family are waiting for him so they can go out to dinner. So this film's pretty good. Nothing remarkable but enjoyable, and it deserves a bit more notoriety. To compare it to another film I reviewed, Weird Science, it's a similar point of view I had after watching that one, but with slight improvements. Firstly, I think Flight of the Navigator has a lot more charm. David is someone that you can really feel for, and his friendship with Max is very sweet. His outburst to Carolyn is pretty realistic, and overall, Joey Kramer's portrayal is great. It's child acting done well, and it's not often that putting the central role on a child is so successful. Sarah Jessica Parker's small role as Carolyn may be a pointless answer one day, but it's a good enough portrayal for what it needs to be. I have to say though that David's parents, played by Veronica Cartwright and Cliff DeYoung, were pretty bad. They express almost no emotion throughout when they should be angry, ecstatic that their son has returned, frustrated, something to make it feel like they actually care at all. Jeff comes closest to this, but otherwise his family just don't seem bothered whether David is there or not. Let's talk the voice of Max next. He's credited as Paul Mull, which is a pseudonym for Paul Rubens, who played Pee Wee Herman for years before. Honestly, what kind of guy uses a pseudonym? Any Tom, Dick or Harry could pick one. Rubens apparently wanted his part to be a surprise for moviegoers, and it certainly was for me. He voices Max well, and I'm not surprised. He's a very talented actor, public controversy aside. Speaking of, let's come back to that documentary I mentioned at the beginning, Life After the Navigator. Now, I've not seen this one, but the trailer had me do some research. Joey Kramer had some difficulty in adjusting to normal life after Flight of the Navigator. He didn't get many roles and developed substance issues and trouble with the law, which culminated in a 2-year prison sentence in 2016. From what I understand, things are a lot better for him now, following treatment, and personally, I hope he continues to lead a clean life. Story-wise, Flight of the Navigator is pretty simple and it does what it needs to. Not every film needs to have a deep story, so I'm happy with how it went, but at the same time there are some issues with depth. NASA are shown to be chasing David and Max, but if movies have taught me anything, it's the military that should be the ones pursuing them. A hardened military officer who takes no crap and stops at nothing to get what he wants. Instead, we get Dr. Faraday, who I haven't really mentioned until now. He's fine, but it means the film is missing a main antagonist. Maybe that's the reason for me why the film lacks any kind of substance. There's some good ideas, and I know it's not a long film, so it has to use its time wisely, but at the same time there isn't any big set piece or any real memorable moments that makes the film iconic. Perhaps that's why it's only a cult favourite and not mainstream. You could have had a bit more building of the relationship between David and Max, maybe when flying from Florida to Tokyo, fly to other well-known places around the world. At one point, David and Max fly under the sea, but it's another potentially wasted opportunity. Have David stare out into the ocean and see fish, sharks, or even play into the fantasy story and have a mermaid swim by. Much like the mermaids in Breaking the Storm by Jasmine Water. Whilst I congratulate myself on that epic segue, I'd like to thank today's sponsor Jasmine Water and her latest book Breaking the Storm. Last time I promoted the paperback, but this great romance novel is also available on Kindle and Kindle Unlimited, making it a lot easier to read on the go. Using your phone or tablet, you could read this on public transport, a park, in bed, or even on a walk. Just be careful of your surroundings. I recommended before giving this talented new author a try, and I hear that she's working on some more great stories. So why not get in now before she becomes mainstream and download Breaking the Storm today? That way you can say you liked it before it was cool. The link is in the description of this video, and now let's get back to Flight of the Navigator. Let's talk aesthetics. They've aged okay-ish. This is an 80s film, so of course there are puppets playing aliens, wireframe special effects on screen, and of course the look of the ship. Personally, I quite like its sleek design and the fact it looks like a shell. I wonder if it takes my Oyster card. The pearl in this metaphor would be Max, who I get some very strong GLaDOS vibes from. For those who don't know who or what a GLaDOS is, she's the AI in Portal, a puzzle game whose sarcastic belittles you throughout rather hilariously.
Well done. Here come the test results. You are a horrible person. That's what it says. A horrible person. We weren't even testing for that.
Max isn't that bad, but his logical brain becomes a bit over the top when he absorbs some of David's personality. Oh, and they really try hard to make compliance a catchphrase.
Stop trying to make
compliance
happen. It's not going to happen.
Well, excuse me.
Like I said, I like the look of the ship. It reminds me a little bit of that ITV show Aquila. Anyone else remember that? Never mind. I really like the music. It's no surprise that it's Alan Silvestri at it again. The man who came up with themes like The Avengers, Back to the Future, Forrest Gump, and many, many more. This one may not be as well remembered as others, but when it was played, I really enjoyed it, and I've said before that a good theme tying a film together can really bring everything together. Flight of the Navigator is not without its charm. I loved the E.T. reference late into the film, but overall, it's an okay movie that maybe should be remembered more, but doesn't really do enough to make itself that memorable. It's a very 1980s film with every cliche from that era being checked off. But I think it's a bit more than that. It has heart and charm, but lacks the ambition to be anything other than a cult favourite. Give it a watch if you haven't already, it's worth an hour and a half of your time. Personally, I have it on DVD now, but I don't know when I'll see it again. Maybe one day, years from now, when I'm feeling like going on an 80s film binge. And so we come to the end of my review. Thank you once again to Jasmine Water for sponsoring this video, and you can check out Breaking the Storm in the description below. If you liked the video, give it a thumbs up and make sure that you subscribe for more content.
Compliance.
For now though, thank you very much for watching.